We want to take a look at America's views on some of those challenges facing the country and particularly how President Biden is handling them. Our CBS News poll out today indicates that the president's approval rating is at 50%. It has stabilized following the chaotic Afghanistan pullout and is underpinned by positive views on handling of the COVID outbreak and vaccine distribution. But Americans' view of the economy has steadily decreased since the summer. Less than 40% now think it's in good shape. Joining us now is CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Good morning to you, Anthony.
Good morning, Margaret.
Anthony, time and again we hear it is the virus that determines the direction of the economy. So, with that in mind, what are Americans telling you about whether or not they are willing to vaccinate their children when it becomes available for 5 to 11-year-olds?
Well, Margaret, not everybody would, and I think that sets up one of the key numbers to track as we go forward in the next phase of fighting this pandemic. You've got just over a third who say immediately yes, they would. You've got almost as many who immediately say no, they would not. And then you've got folks in the middle who are maybes. This reminds me a lot of what we saw earlier this year when the vaccine first became available, rolling out for all adults. And I think you're going to see, if that same behavior plays out, a rush, if and when it becomes available, of these folks to go and get it for their kids. And then the maybes, they do know that kids can get very sick from coronavirus. So this is where the role of public health officials and information will really come into play. But then these no folks, I should add that there's a strong connection between whether the parents themselves are vaccinated and whether they would get their kids 5 to 11 vaccinated. That's a majority of vaccinated parents who would, but it's a majority of unvaccinated parents who say they would not. And I would add, we know something about why unvaccinated people still say that they will not. We've been tracking this in our polling and throughout the year. It's a mixture of very personal reasons, but also some that have a political tinge to it. So there are folks, a majority of them unvaccinated, who say they're worried about the side effects for themselves. But there's also a majority that say they don't trust the government, some who are skeptical that they don't think the vaccine works. And as more Americans become vaccinated, the remaining unvaccinated, their views about these things remain and become concentrated, more concentrated. So that is a higher hill for people who are trying to push people to get vaccinated, Margaret.
So given all of that, what are Americans telling you about what they're willing to do right now when it comes to going out and spending?
Yeah, and this is so important for the economy going forward. First of all, as the holiday season approaches, people are thinking about who they're going to visit, who they gather with, right? There's a quarter of folks who tell us that this holiday season they're only going to gather with other vaccinated people if they're vaccinated. And there are some who think it'll be a mixture of gathering with both vaxxed and unvaxxed. But there's a third who say they're not sure or they won't check. Maybe that's an awkward conversation to have. Maybe they don't know how to raise it. So that's something to watch in terms of behavior and how people go out and who they hang out with. Then there's the economy in terms of where people go and spend money. Well, for the vaccinated people, they say they'd be more comfortable if they knew there were vaccine requirements to, for example, get on a plane, go to a restaurant, even go back to their workplaces. And that's a majority of people, so that economic impact could be pretty strong if they feel comfortable. Maybe that puts more pressure on businesses to put those kinds of requirements in place. And finally, there's the overall outlook. What do you think is going to happen in the pandemic? And frankly, there's only a quarter of people who think that this winter it's going to get better than it is now. Otherwise, views are mixed between whether it stays the same or even gets worse, Margaret.
Anthony, President Biden said that it was the virus impacting the jobs and hiring, but also said that if his spending packages are passed, that it will help to alleviate all of this. How is his effort to get this passed resonating?
Well, first and foremost, a lot of people say they don't know what's in the proposal. In fact, it's only 1 in 10 that thinks they feel like they know a lot of the specifics. Then we went and we tested individual items in this, and what we learned was that people are more familiar with the potential cost and the spending aspects in dollar figures than they are with any of the particular policies that might end up in it. So have a look at this. You've got a majority of people who say they've heard something about that it might be $3.5 trillion in spending. You've got a majority of people who say they've heard something about potential tax increases for higher income people. But that really outweighs the number of people who've heard about things like lowering Medicare drug prices or Medicare coverage being expanded to dental and eye and hearing. Now, there's good news for Democrats in this too, even though there's this lack of knowledge, and that is that those policy proposals are popular in principle. So lowering prescription drug prices, for example, that Medicare coverage, all of those things are widely popular, paid family leave, universal pre-K, but again, people are less familiar with those things, and support for the bill does go up among people who are familiar with these. So that's something to watch going forward. Where does that all leave you, though? Well, there aren't a majority of people who feel like this bill right now would help them and their family or help the economy. That's part of that disconnect and that lack of awareness, and this is going to be, I think, the big measure to watch going forward, Margaret.
The big measure, because it could have political consequences for the president, for Democrats who have unified control right now. Anthony, will this package then benefit the party if it does pass, if Democrats can come to agreement?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right point, even as we head into the 2022 elections. I know that might seem far away, but those campaigns are just around the corner. Here's a couple of things to track that follows from that. Are Biden and the Democrats working on issues you care a lot about? Right now, it's just over a third who say that. A few more say that they're working on things they care a little bit about. And I would add this, you talk about the economy and you talk about what those issues are people care about. They're feeling the effects of inflation. You've got 60% who say that Joe Biden isn't focusing enough on that. So it's about whether the Democrats and Joe Biden are finding that resonance and matching up with what people think are their priorities. Margaret.
Anthony, thank you.